The agreement showed up a week prior to the lady's arrival. Ethan Harlow clutched it in his calloused palms beneath the lantern's glow, scanning the tiny text 2 times, then once more for certainty. $200 for a catalog bride. He'd forwarded $100 initially, the remainder payable upon receipt. What he overlooked, tucked away in the rear sections in script tinier than insect paths, was this: should the outstanding amount go unpaid within a week of her coming, the lady would be retrieved and redirected as bound workforce in Cheyenne. Simply put, she'd be traded twice. Ethan affixed his signature regardless. He was weary of solitude, and $100 was his final scrap after the harsh winter. He reckoned he'd scrape together the balance somehow. He invariably managed. A week afterward, Amelia Thorne descended from the locomotive in her spotless journey gown and tidy tresses, lugging 1 suitcase and a soul brimming with optimism. She anticipated a kind spouse. She encountered Ethan instead, a fellow with frame like a stable post, fingers that might snap timber or cradle a fledgling, and a serene visage that hid nothing. Their first night as spouses unfolded unlike what both had perceived. Ethan endeavored to be tender. Amelia endeavored to be bold. Yet as morning broke, she rose with her form throbbing, her respiration ragged, and her dignity smarting. Ethan looked like a fellow who'd grappled a tempest through the dark and scarcely triumphed. Now daylight blazed, stark and golden across the Wyoming grit. Amelia positioned herself by his homestead counter, clutching it with pallid fingers, striving to steady her tone. She gulped deeply and murmured the phrase that astonished him beyond any prior utterance. "It aches, but let's attempt it once more this evening." Ethan gazed at her, unsure if her quivering stemmed from dread or the valor required to voice it. He yearned to assure her she owed him not, but the declaration lodged in his gullet. What Ethan remained unaware of thus far was this: the fellow controlling the other part of that pact was already en route to the spread, and if Ethan didn't settle up, Amelia wouldn't remain his bride by dusk. She'd become Harlan's holding instead. For an extended instant following Amelia's daring whisper, Ethan merely lingered there with his hands on her arms, trying to understand a woman who suffered in all manners, yet resolved to remain. He hadn't dozed, not truly, and the anxiety weighed thick on his ribs. When Amelia sought to rise abruptly, she flinched sharply. Ethan seized her forearm. Gentle now, meal first, fretting afterward. Ethan Harlow, the rugged herder who typically dined upright like a coyote, surprisingly whisked eggs with the delicacy of Sunday school cute. Post-meal, he escorted her towards the enclosure. She attempted a handful of paces independently, but the tenderness buckled her joints. Ethan drew near, sans pressing her, poised to steady her if she faltered. There was an element in her persistent efforts that earned his admiration beyond what he had imagined. As she propped against the enclosure barrier to pause, Ethan found himself voicing his genuine intent. He withheld the packed details. Not yet, not as she mended, but the 7-day limit gnawed at his thoughts like a pebble in his moccasin, chafing him sore with each stride. This was day 4. "You gave your utmost yesterday eve. No disgrace and soreness. Not in these parts." Amelia looked at him, gazed gentler now. "I just wish to be enough, for the life I came here to claim." Ethan tilted her bonnet against the glare. It was a minor act, but she noticed it. Lads like Ethan didn't fuss about trifles unless they mean something. What she ignored was that optimism was on the verge of trial by an outsider approaching the spread precisely then. The horseman appeared shortly before noon. As the warmth began to waver across the meadow, Ethan spotted the dust first, that slender, soiled streak on the path leading to the courtyard. The outsider approached leisurely, like one who convinced the world was his domain. Elegant city coat, rigid neckband, hat overly pristine for Wyoming soil. "Good day, Mr. Harlow." The tone was greasy like a scum on pond. Ethan sensed his jaw clench. "She's inside. What's it to you?" Harlan dismounted the mount and extracted a hide pouch from his satchel. "Since she lacks full recompense and my enterprise thrives not on optimism and grips." Ethan accepted the pouch. Within lay the identical accord he had endorsed, but Harlan indicated the provision Ethan had bypassed: 7 days for complete settlement or the bride reclaimed. This was day 4. She'd be redirected as toil in the settlement, in straightforward speaking, bartered anew while believing she'd been selected. Ethan sensed a blaze surge in his torso. He'd interred a spouse once. He refused to witness some city sharp declare her chattel on his territory. Amelia emerged onto the veranda then, patting her hands on her pinafore. She recognized this juncture would arise. Her kinsman had disclosed the reality the eve before departing Ohio. He'd covered merely half, as that was his utmost. She'd prayed Ethan would stay oblivious. She'd prayed 7 days sufficed to compel him to retain her. But now Harlan had arrived, and her optimism withered in the courtyard beneath that relentless Wyoming blaze. She beheld the documents. She beheld the expression on Ethan's countenance, and she beheld Harlan's smug grin. Ethan regarded Amelia ashen and shaking and forged a silent vow to his core. He'd forfeited one spouse to frost sickness. He wouldn't surrender this one to a scrap of parchment. Harlan doffed his lid toward her. "Miss Thorne, you omitted informing Mr. Harlow your kinsman tendered only partial sum. Accord stipulates if the remainder lingers, you return with me." Her limbs nearly collapsed. Across Ohio, deeming she'd flee being a load, only to discover she was an invoice, not a consort, an entry in accounts. Ethan interposed before her instinctively, that broad build obscuring the outsider's sight. "You're hauling on nowhere." Harlan stood firm. "Statute decrees otherwise, companion, but I'm an equal sort. Settle the due, add my inconvenience, and we erase this excursion." Ethan eyed Amelia, complexion waned, digits trivering. This female wouldn't be vended doubly. So what might a fatigued Wyoming herder do when statute and funds dictate one course and his instinct another? Linger with me and you'll learn Ethan's subsequent selection. Ethan Harlow wasn't one to yield readily, but he wasn't daft. Should this escalate to a bellowing fray in the courtyard, the chap with the quill and seals would prevail. So he paced it deliberate. "You seek coin? You'll receive reply in the burg. I'll confer with the marshal personally." Harlan grinned like a cat with milk on his jaws. "Naturally you shall. I'll grant you till dawn." He departed in the midst of a swirl of haze. The instant he vanished, Amelia at last permitted respiration. "Ethan, if the documents claim I pertain to them, perhaps I ought to return." Ethan negated with his head. "Ain't occurring. Not post your traverse of all that expanse to arrive." He met her gaze squarely. "You're not cargo. You're my spouse." Those terms struck fiercer than a blow. No gent had ever asserted her thus, not as an object, but as an individual. That afternoon later, Ethan readied his steed and ventured toward Cheyenne. A mere 2 hours' jaunt, but each tick dragged like eternity. In Cheyenne, he splayed the accord across the marshal's bureau and recounted all that Harlan had said. The marshal pledged little, but upon Ethan's mention of apprehension that the chap might return to the spread, early obligation resolved, the enforcer shoved aside his seat and rose. "I'll come along and inspect matters firsthand." But Harlan preceded him in alternate fashion. As twilight descended and the grassland shifted to violet and ebony, Amelia perched solitary at the galley board with one lantern flickering. Ethan lingered in the burg. Then she detected it, mounts in the courtyard, not solitary, multiple. She shifted to the pane and spied Harlan returned, now banked by 2 drover aides, chorus-appearing blokes with the indolent strut of mischief. "Miss Thorne, accord mandates you depart with me this eve. Harlow may reclaim his portion once he masters settling dues." An inner fracture seized Amelia. All the fear from Ohio, all the humiliation from that endless rail voyage, all the agony from her debut night here, it surged into keenness. She proceeded to the sleeping chamber and delved beneath the pallet. That morn, post Harlan's exit, Ethan had revealed the scattergun's hiding spot. In these wilds, a lady must grasp self-defense. Coyotes, outsiders, whatever arises. He'd instructed loading it, bracing it firm, sighting downwards if trepidation gripped. Trepidation gripped now, but she recalled each syllable. Her palms located the scattergun, and she verified the breech as he demonstrated. Charged, primed. Amelia advanced onto the veranda, lantern glow at her rear, firearm in grasp. "I'm departing nowhere alongside you." Harlan chuckled, though a fissure marred it. "Lower it, lass, you grasp not of its use." Her limb trembled, yet she held the muzzle aloft. "I grasp precisely its use.
For the inaugural instance in existence, I'm uttering refusal. One of the wage hands hoisted a spur onto the riser, groping for her. Amelia snapped the firearm his way. Her digit glided. The scattergun thundered. The discharge shattered the veranda barrier beside his thigh, hurled shards into the doom, and immobilized every bloke in that courtyard. A field on the path, hastening domicile swifter than prudent, Ethan caught that report and spurred his mount fiercely toward the spread. Ethan galloped into the courtyard as the scattergun's reverberation ebbed over the nocturnal grassland. His steed skidded to a halt, soil scattering, and he vaulted down with the velocity a fellow summons only when one cherished faces peril. He surveyed the tableau in one arc, the splintered barrier, the wage hand rigid with fragments embedded in his breeches, Harlan erect as a palisade, and Amelia on the veranda with the scattergun quivering in her clasp, lantern radiance beaming behind like an aureole of flame. Ethan interposed between her and the blokes without hesitation. Then he pivoted to Harlan. His timbre sank deep, the sort emerging from a fellow who's tilled soil, entombed kin, and endured countless gales. You shan't lay a finger on her, not this eve, not henceforth. The marshal appeared instants later, winded and saucer-eyed, his aides in tow. He'd trailed Ethan from the burg when the report sounded, and they'd lashed their mounts fiercely. Harlan hastened to him, brandishing his documents like a cleric with scripture, bellowing of accords and obligations. But the marshal eyed Amelia foremost. He noted the contusions below her yoke. He noted the dread in her posture. He noted a woman who'd fled lifelong and at last elected to endure. Amelia elevated her jaw. Her timbre was subdued, yet resolute. I pertain to no one. I traped here as a consort, not a voucher for some gent's fortune. I'm finished with barter. The marshal seized the documents from Harlan and perused them by lantern. His mien was inscrutable. At length he looked up. Accord's valid, Harlan, but so's a gent's prerogative to discharge dues. He addressed Ethan. What's his demand? Harlan beamed. $100 remainder, plus $50 for my vexation. That's $150. Promptly. Ethan sensed his mandible lock. He lacked $150. He held perhaps 30 indoors, and the surplus bound in livestock unsaleable till autumn. The marshal discerned it in his faces. Harlan, too. No funds means no consort, Harlow. She departs with me this eve. Ethan beheld Amelia. She clutched the scattergun still, but her limbs quaked. Then he declared his resolve. I'll remit in 3 days, every penny. But should you graze her ere then, you'll rue ever treading my soil. The marshal hemmed. Harlan, you've had your answer. 3 days. Return thereafter for your coin, not prior. Harlan eyed the scattergun. He eyed Ethan. He eyed the marshal, who'd signaled his allegiance plainly. He glimpsed the stout sire steer corralled by the barrier. He tallied inwardly. A gent frantic enough to vend prime stock thus would muster full settlement. Then he doffed his lid, mounted his steed, and vanished into the murk. Yet his timber drifted rearward. 3 days, Harlow, not an instant beyond. Upon their departure, Amelia permitted the scattergun to droop at her flank. Her limbs nigh yielded. Ethan steadied her softly and enfolded her, not as chattel, but as equal. She pressed her brow to his torso, inhaling measured. Whence the funds? Her timbre so faint he nigh overlooked it. Ethan withdrew sufficiently to regard her. I'll vend the steer, the prime one. That'll fetch $150, perchance surplus. But you require him for sires. I require you beyond. It was the plainest verity he'd voiced. Amelia sealed her lids, and for the premiere since Ohio, she yielded to tears. Not from dread, not from torment, but the odd, delicate sensation of selection. 3 days hence, Ethan ventured to Cheyenne with $150 in his pouch. He tendered Harlan before attesters. Harlan tallied each note doubly, expectorated soilward, and departed wordless. The accord resolved. Amelia Thorne was cargo no more. She was a consort. And that evening, as Ethan returned to discover her waiting on the veranda with brew and a tender beam, she voiced the terms anew, but this instance they bore altered weight. "It no longer irks. Let's try once more this evening." Ethan beamed. It was the kind of beam that shaves anims from a gent's visage. And they did. Oft the mightiest blooms sprout from eaves bent on shattering us. This story concerns a female vended twice who elected her own, of a gent who bartered his Moreau for hers, of the juncture when dual fractured souls resolved to forge wholeness. Oft strength resembles not brawn. It resembles a youthful woman on a veranda voicing refusal for the premiere in existence. It resembles a wearied herder electing to shield betwixt her and the cosmos. Have you ever known a juncture when you at last arose and uttered "enough" to a pursuit that dogged you for anims? What lesson bore it? Should this story stir you slightest, bestow a thumbs up that furtherkin may heed it. And if these subdued frontier yarns of valor, mending, and renewed fortune's delight, go ahead and enrist that you never overlook the subsequent. Now breathe in, quaff whatever you sip this evening, and recount in the comments whence do you heed and what hour ticks.